Connecticut and Massachusetts, Z&M Homes buys houses. Sell your property to the local guys.
Needs repairs, updates, maybe foreclosure or inherited? No problem. We gotcha. Google or add us on Facebook at ZANDMHomes.com.
It's Baxie's musical podcast.
In 1979, keyboard player Barry Andrews would leave my favorite band. I've never held it against him. I think we've all moved past it. But for those of you who've spent any time listening to this podcast, you probably know what band I'm talking about. But for those of you who haven't, the band was XTC. And of the 5 people who played in XTC, I've now spoken to 4 of them. In other words, drummer Terry Chambers should probably check his email. But this isn't really about them. This is a story about Barry. And the story behind Barry Andrews is really interesting because after 44 years, it would be Barry Andrews who would become the most prolific member of the bunch, not just as a solo performer, but as the co-founder of the insanely groove-driven powerhouse Shriekback, a band that was formed in 1981 with former Gang of Four bass player Dave Allen. Together, along with co-singer and guitar player Carl Marsh and later drummer Martin Barker, Shriekback would create a string of records that were jammed with incredible rhythms, dark and mysterious lyrics, and an overwhelming amount of texture that most bands couldn't even dream of, including the very bands that these guys came from. I'm talking about songs like My Spine is the Bassline from 1982, or Lined Up from 1983, or Malaria, Nemesis, or Fish Below the Ice from their 1985 classic album Oil and Gold. Even songs like Underwater Boys or Blacklight Trap from their 1986 album Big Night Music. Just insanely great and occasionally overwhelming. Nobody, and I mean nobody, has ever sounded like Shriekback. Even their most recent work holds up to the same incredible standard of their earlier career, particularly 2021's 1,000 Books or last year's Bola Hula. And when I say that Barry has been prolific throughout his entire career, I'm not just talking about the 17 albums that he's released with Shriekback. Barry has also been a member of the League of Gentlemen with Robert Fripp from King Crimson. He's played with Iggy Pop in his 1980 album The Soldier, an album that included David Bowie and Glenn Matlock from the Sex Pistols. He's played with Brian Eno. He's recorded an album of largely improvisational music with his former XTC bandmate Andy Partridge. And I haven't even talked about his solo work because there's plenty of that stuff too. In other words, Barry Andrews is a total beast whose blistering vision and furious tenacity have built one of the most unique and enduring supergroups ever. This is my conversation with the legendary Barry Andrews from Shriekback on Baxie's musical podcast.
Here I am.
There's the Barry Andrews I know and love.
Hello, Michael. How you doing?
I'm doing great, Barry. How are you?
I'm all right. I was just I've got this little setup here. I'm doing some gigs as a kind of solo performer type person, and it's like it's in a dub style, I suppose. The microphone I happen to be using is going through all these dub related things, like this.
I like it. If we were able to have a conversation that way, that would be great.
I know. There's such nice sound. Okay. Put them away now. Hey, yeah. What's happening?
I'm doing great. I'm so happy to have you. I have to admit I was a little anxious to talk to you, not because I wasn't ready for it or I didn't have questions. I just didn't want to screw up the pronunciation of Bola Hula. More worried about that than anything else.
That's the main thing to worry about. Yeah.
However you pronounce that record, Bola Hula, I hope it didn't screw it up too bad.
You absolutely hit the nail on the head there.
Oh, thank God. What a relief. I mean, I could pronounce 1,000 Books a million times, but Bola Hula kind of threw me for. I had to literally had to diagram the entire thing. Don't screw this up in front of Mr. Andrews. Whatever you do. But I've been a big fan for an awful long period of time, and it doesn't happen very often when an artist or a band has been together for 43 years recording, and some of the strongest material you've done is being done like right now. That's pretty unusual. Tell me about that, to have that kind of longevity, because I mean, it's really nothing to just sneeze at it and ignore.
Well, yeah, that's a big question, isn't it? How, if the question is how do you carry on working with other people for so long, I suppose it's yeah. I should point out that we've sort of come in and out of relationship with each other. I mean,
Sure.
and actually, Bola Hula is just me. There's only me on
Right.
Bola Hula. So I suppose it's mainly that I think I have been like, I need this, guys, and I'm going to I'm going to make this happen one way or another. Are you on board or not? So the album's gone through the band's gone through various configurations where it was me, or it was me and Carl, or it was me and Martin, or sometimes it was me and Lou and Martin and Mark Raudver and Simon Edwards, and then back in the day it was Dave, and so they've all been all these configurations. But you would have to say, being honest, that the one constant factor is me. So,
That's true, but even if it's just you, to still stay focused to that one brand. I mean, you've done solo work too. I mean, I'm certainly not discounting any of that,
Sure.
but to stay true to that one brand for so long takes a commitment to that music that some artists they want to pivot and try something completely different, but you've kind of kept that lane going for all that time.
Yeah.
That's pretty impressive.
That is an interesting comment, isn't it? Because it sounds, the way you said it then, you make it sound like a virtue, but it may very well be that there's nowhere else to go. Robert Wyatt said a good thing, which was one commits oneself to what is left. So that might be a slightly disparaging way of saying it, but I think there's a thing. I was talking to my cousin actually about finding your voice in music, like the point at which you sort of stop being the sum of your influences and the thing kicks over into something that hopefully is kind of yours and yours alone. It's obviously, because it's rock and roll, there will always be lots of influences there, but somehow you've managed to get something a bit original out of this big gestalt of stuff that you've absorbed.
I mean, you're a good example of someone that found their voice, considering what you had gone through with XTC and even the little bit of stuff I heard from Restaurant for Dogs. You can hear a direction being built. You can kind of hear the building blocks of what Shriekback would become. But you certainly did find your voice at some point.
Yeah.
And I assume that all of those things really were building blocks to get there.
Yes, I think that's right. I mean, I've seen other people do it. It's interesting when you watch other people and you can see them kind of, no, not down there. No, over there. Yeah, that's it. Yeah, do that. But once you find it, I think that was my point really, was once you find that voice, it's very hard to say retrace your steps, go back and shall I make it something else? Perhaps something more flamenco influenced, It's not like falling in love or falling out of love. You rarely can't go back. You know what I mean? You do.
Sure.
Once you've done it, and that's then your thing. And I suppose I've found it easy to keep faith with it really, because it's there is nothing else like it in my life.
I remember being in college and working in college radio, and I remember when Oil and Gold came out. This was 85, and I remember hearing it for the very first time and not even realizing that it was you and Dave Allen from Gang of Four at the time. But the first time I heard it, I'm like, oh my God, this sounds so enormous. It sounds like this incredible wall of amazing grooves and sound. And then to find out that about the XTC and the Gang of Four connection made it all that more interesting, because it's so different from either one of those bands that it was all the more impressive. Because sometimes you get that idea of a supergroup and it doesn't, really materialize the way Shriekback did. It was just an overwhelming wall of sound.
Well, yeah, thanks for noticing. I remember writing somewhere that, in theory, because I mean, people were interested Oh, right. So XTC. What happens if you mate XTC with Gang of Four? And one answer might be you get herky jerky agitprop, or the other one might, or a bleak industrial take on the Beatles.
Right.
But then you end up with this other thing, this kind of deep slurry of stuff, very bass heavy, extremely arty, and has a title that refers to a freshwater variety of British fish. And nobody saw that coming.
So when you're doing your restaurant for dogs and you're getting that sound in order, or at least in your head, and then Dave Allen becomes available from Gang of Four, I mean, did you know right away that this was exactly what you wanted to do with it, or did it somehow develop between the two of you?
Yeah, well, I think Dave wasn't that sure what he wanted to do, really. He just wanted to not be in the Gang of Four anymore and to carry on making records. And I guess the stuff that we were all listening to at the time, dance music, the first wave of New York electro, Africa Bambaataa and people like that. And so I think Dave's idea was really that we do something like that, only more poppy, because he was very clear he wanted to have a pop band on his hands. Me and Carl were a bit sort of more reticent about it. As is often the case, you have a big plan, and then you go and do something completely different for some reason, because you don't really know what you're doing. But something within you is kind of guiding you. So I suppose I had the restaurant for dogs thing, which had been like a huge failure in some ways, but in other ways really inspiring. And I was encouraged mainly by Dave, I think, saying, "Look, I'll sort everything else out. I'll do all the dealing with the music business. I'll get the studio time. I'll get some money to live off and get bands to move gear around town. And all you have to do is do the music end of things." So I was like, that sounds like a really good deal. And Dave was incredibly good at doing that stuff. I'm fucking terrible at doing that stuff. So it really was like a great little deal. And then, that relationship, me and Dave being, the drive and the facilitator, and me having the wafty, arty ideas, lasted for a really long time, and was in fact the core of the band. There would have been that was the essential relationship that engendered Shriekback.
I'm sure over the last 4 decades, you've been asked every possible question about XTC and why you left. And to me, it's not real hard to figure out. I mean, the 3 songwriters in a band, and that just had to be so challenging and maybe stifling creatively. But my question isn't really why you left. It's really about the songs that you would eventually come up with. I mean, My Weapon, Super Tough from Go To. Again, very clearly, like, building blocks, stepping stones. Even when I'm hearing those songs, I just listened to them again this morning just to be sure if I was onto something here. It sounds like when you write songs, it's based primarily on a rhythm, and then it's built from that. And that seems to have been kind of the theme throughout all of this, that it's the rhythm first, and then that tends to inform everything else that goes on top of it. Is that a fair assessment on how you put together music?
Yeah, that's bang on. Whether I sort of arrived at that conclusion in XTC, I'm not sure. Although Super Tough sort of does tend to make its case. It was something I discovered very quickly. In XTC, me, Colin, and Andy would bring along songs. I'd play it on the guitar, and then Terry would try and get a groove to it, and Colin would, and then we build it up like that around. So you write the song, and then you add the rhythm to it. And I don't know, the music I started getting interested in after XTC was very rhythmic music, like funk and reggae particularly. And what I liked about those, as opposed to the way we did things in XTC, was that there were lots of stops and starts and kind of, and I don't know, it's something that struck me. It was sort of weird and inorganic and kind of somehow in your head rather than in your body when and that's suddenly it's like and it's a middle eight and then it goes back into another thing. And I always found that that's so fiddly. I don't really like that. So yeah, when I started working with Martin Barker, actually, that was Martin Barker and the drum machine, and then you realize that you can just have this thing and it just goes along, and it's very satisfying. There's no real reason to change it. And it's much more fun if you don't actually.
It sounds like in the same way that you're trying to find your voice at that point, even the band XTC was finding their voice. I mean, they didn't really settle into their pocket until Drums and Wires. And actually, Dave Allen, I would say, is the same way. I mean, the way he would play bass for Shriekback is 180 degrees away from Gang of Four. As great as Gang of Four was, it sounded like he was still trying to find his voice too, and found it with you in Shriekback.
Well, it was a very wonderful thing, I think, where I discovered Martin Barker in a club in Clapham, and he was a young lad just down from the north, and his background was not exactly jazz, but he did like jazz, and he sort of hung out with jazzy people. So there was a certain amount of world music in his playing, but it tended towards a sort of quite scattery. Yeah, a lot of technique did Martin, and I think drummers with a lot of technique can become quite fiddly and light,
right?
Sort of, not about a groove. And Dave was like the absolute opposite of that. It was like you didn't even need the drums with Dave playing. Jesus Christ, it's so like bleak and industrial and pig iron and battleships and in your face. So putting these two together was like, oh God, it's just going to crush Martin under his bass. And Martin, but what in fact happened was that Martin became more solid, and Dave became lighter and more flexible and more sort of became unafraid of beauty, I think. So things like the bass line on This Big Hush, which I listened to today with much marveling at how lovely and smooth and how it follows the melody line, and it's a very, very musical kind of bass line. And initially it was quite hard to sort of get Dave to sort of come on, I can't fucking do this, but then no, because it's like you're gonna have to push the envelope a little bit here. And then when he did, I think he discovered that this is fucking great, and that he was really, really good at it, and he could bring all that solidity into a more I love the Gang of Four as well, so there's nothing wrong with that style of brutal industrial bass playing. But Dave found he had a few more stops on the organ.
Well, the nice part about funk in particular is I think once as a musician, once you settle into that rhythmic pocket, it winds up becoming not only really fun to play, but it also becomes, in a way, you just become you become like a looser musician with it. It's like you're not necessarily controlling the funk. Sometimes the funk is controlling you, and there's something kind of satisfying about that, I think.
The funk is channeling you. You are a vessel for the funk.
So it's kind of like a very George Clinton kind of way of looking at funk music, I suppose.
Yeah. No, I think that's totally right, and that's why it's nice to dance to, isn't it? Really. I was yesterday actually by someone called Jan Jalakin, and it's I guess it's kind of lo-fi experimental kind of stuff, and there's nothing much on it. It's just this tiny little, but it's full of groove, and it's really, really it's tiny, just tiny little dusty. It sounds like dust on a record, crackling away. But it's if you listen to it the right way, it's absolutely a sort of banging techno tune. So the groove's in there. It's just everything's been miniaturized. So it's I think it is a question of rhythmic coherence rather than sonic quality.
One of the things that I absolutely wanted to ask you about, because I think there's a really interesting twist in your career after you left XTC, and after and as you're getting ready for your own music, you get involved with Robert Fripp on his first solo album, Exposure. And you're playing with everybody from Peter Gabriel to Daryl Hall and Eno and Phil Collins. How did you meet Robert Fripp? How did that become a thing?
Oh, it was just kind of pretty accidental. I was over in New York with XTC, and we were playing with Talking Heads at the Beacon Theatre, as I recall. And Robert came along. I think he was living in New York at the time, and he was looking for, I think the way he said it was, I was looking for some musicians to change the temperature of a couple of tunes on my record. So So he came backstage and he said, "Would I be interested in playing some organ on a couple of tracks from Exposure?" So I thought I was a bit of a weird choice for the prog rock oriented
Sure.
Mr. Pritt, but I wasn't about to say no, and he was paying, and I thought it'd be fun. So I borrowed Jerry Harrison's organ and went over there, and it became apparent very quickly that these tracks were not the sort of thing I was used to at all. In fact, it's best not to try and follow all the changing time signatures and all of this very, very technical shit going on. So I ended up just kind of doing big glissandos and kind of falling on the keyboard. And I was like, all right. Yeah, so I got back to London after that, and I guess I did an album with Iggy Pop, and it was a little bit after that Robert got back in touch and said he was putting a band together and would I be interested in playing in it.
I just think it's really interesting because XTC is kind of dominated by very strong personality and Andy Partridge, and then all of a sudden you're working with a guy who also has a pretty dominant approach and personality, but in a very, very different kind of way. What are the biggest differences between the two?
Yeah, I don't know. They're both from the West Country. Both got funny voices. Play guitar.
Fair enough. So I remember seeing the video for the first time for the Underwater Boys, which I thought was a really it's a beautiful song. It's kind of frightening in a way, but the cool thing about it is I really like the stuff that Shriekback did that wasn't necessarily in your face, but maybe some of the softer, quieter stuff. I always thought that was really intriguing aspects of that catalog. Tell me a little bit about the texture between both sides of it.
Yeah, I think that was one of those strange discoveries that we made probably on the second album, on Care, with the track Evaporation. And this relates to my dub experiment I'm doing at the moment. So I've got this kind of side project called Stick Basin, and I'm going out doing some solo gigs with just a small mobile intelligent outfit of machines, and playing around with dub textures, using quite a lot of those Shriekback songs that you identify. The dark, big bass, quite meditative, slowish songs. And just kind of rhapsodizing on those. So I'm doing like vocals over the top and deconstructing some of them and dubbing them up. But yeah, I guess the reason I'm doing that is because there has been people have been saying to me for some time that that's the bit of Shriekback they really like, is this sort of dubby style thing that we can go to. And as I say, it was on Evaporation on the second album that first discovered it, really. But it comes very directly from Lee Scratch Perry, and listening to some of the two tunes in particular. One was Roast Fish and Cornbread dub, and the other was Bird in Hand, Turn the Super 8. And I had a sort of an epiphany. I tell everybody this. I had an epiphany in a dance hall in Manchester. We were playing with XTC, and one of the roadies was a big reggae fan, way before, white guy, well before that was a fashionable thing. And he put on, I think it was Roast Fish and Cornbread, and I had this experience of reggae that I'd never known before. It was coming out of our big PA system, and you felt the bass inside yourself the way you're meant to. So it stops being something you're listening to and becomes a kind of environment you're moving inside, like an aquarium or something. And I was really, really taken with it, and it became one of those things you kind of, I'd love to be able to do that. Mate, should we have a go at doing that then? That was the first time we got Dave to. Well, we had an engineer as well who was up for more bass. We had usually they go, no, you can't actually put more bass than that. I'm sorry, mate. I'm sure you can. So I'm listening to these records where there's loads more bass than that. No, I don't know about that. But no, you might be able to cut it. No, honestly, no, I can't put any more bass on. And then we came across Ian Capel, who was like, yeah, I reckon I can get some more bass out of this. And so it's like, yeah, that's it. Yeah, do that. So that's how they were born, really, that whole genre of tunes.
One of the things that I noticed in preparing for the interview, and it's as a fan, it was a little frustrating because I really want to be able to listen to a lot of the older stuff and go back to it. But a lot of that older material, particularly in the first couple of albums, is really hard to obtain. I mean, a lot of it is out of print and it hasn't been available for streaming or downloading or been re-released. I mean, for example, I was really trying to find a copy of All Lined Up, which I absolutely adore that song, but it's really hard to find. Even the compilation from Y Records that came out a while back, nearly impossible to find. And if you find it, it's almost beyond the beyond the point of being able to buy it. But what is the story behind the older Shriekback material? Is there a reason why that's become so difficult to find? Has there ever been any thought of re-releasing it at some point?
Well, I would say there's got 2 words for you: shriekback.com, where everything we've ever done can be found and downloaded. Pretty much everything we've done, including all the early stuff. If you just go to shriekback.com, you can either buy it 1 track at a time for 99 pence, or you can get the whole series of albums if you like.
Yeah.
But I guess you're talking about physical product, right?
Yeah, I mean, you can see behind me. This is like a fraction of the music that I have. It's a big wall of CDs back here.
Oh, yeah.
So
I had a feeling you had probably more.
Yeah, no, this is all my wife would let me bring up. My wife can only let me bring so much up from the basement. But yeah, I mean, I'm one of those people that really likes holding on to a physical piece of music.
I think everybody does like physical things, don't they? We are physical beings. We live in the physical world. Why wouldn't we like big chunks of things to hold on to? And I think that's why we're seeing this resurgence of vinyl, which I would do a lot more of vinyl actually. But it seems like the Shriekback demographic is a very very particular one in that our punters seem to like CDs and downloads, but not vinyl. So my son's band, he said, being out the Vales, if you know them, he said we haven't done CD for about 10 years.
Yeah,
it's just vinyl and download. So the young people, that's what they like. But no, our punters, who I would say probably are men of a similar age to you and I, tend to be, and they tend to be men too, tend to like their CDs. So who am I to argue? I just keep churning them out.
My wife protests the amount that I have around the house, and honestly I can't blame her. God help us if we have to move, and that stuff gets moved first because it's the most important stuff in the house. But yet I still love having that stuff.
Yeah, music. I don't know. I'm some sort of weird kind of cold prostitute about music. I don't really care about the object at all. And in fact, I haven't even got some of the albums that I've made personally. I don't know why.
You mentioned earlier about the transitions that Shriekback has gone through personnel-wise. Dave is in, Carl is in. Everyone seems to kind of go back and forth. You said Lou Edmonds had been involved for a while, and I know that in a lot of cases that is somewhat hard to manage and hard to stay focused when there's always something changing from one part to another. And we also talked about you staying focused over the years and being in that lane. Do you like that role of being in charge of Shriekback? Obviously, when you were in XTC, you didn't have that. You did have that when you're doing your own stuff, but then you're in a band, you give up some of that stuff, and then over time you kind of get it back. And so, what do you prefer? What role do you feel most comfortable in? In a collaborative one, or one where you're the primary one with the vision?
Well, like I say, Bola Hula was the first album since, I guess, Life in the Loading Bay that I've done pretty much by myself. And to be honest, it was great. I mean, you haven't got to argue with anybody. You haven't got to worry about, where anybody's at about. So, what do you think of that? Well, I could have done it a little bit more. It's just, your own, and there's something great about that. So I am very comfortable with that, if I'm honest. I mean, I like the directorial role because I can't be bothered having arguments with people when they're obviously wrong about things. So, let's do it my way and it'll be fine.
How dare they have an opinion?
I know. Stupid. But then on the other hand, you do look back at things and go, "Wow, I couldn't have done that on my own. Could I? Wouldn't have seen, that you did need, like for instance, Dave's bass line on This Big Hush was just like, I wouldn't have programmed that if the technology had been around then.
Yeah.
That came out of his world, and there have been Mark things, and in particular, I think collaborating with Carl. It's like, you never know where that guy's going to go in his head. I find it incredibly inspiring. I just thought of listening to Beyond Metropolis. I listened back to that. It was like, wow, Carl, you bastard. That's really something else. And it really kind of, you raise your own game in order to add something to that. All of that is just golden, really, isn't it? But that's the price you pay for the stupid arguments as well, isn't it? Other people are a pain in the ass. Can't live with them.
Yeah, but you occasionally have to work with them, and occasionally you volunteered to work with them. A few years ago, you and Andy Partridge got together and did Monstrance, which I think any XTC fan was delighted by the fact that you guys had gotten together and it seemed like everything was cool. But
they were delighted till they heard it.
Yeah, I was going to say it's
oh my God, Andy Barry working together. Oh fucking Jesus.
Well, I mean, it's all very experimental, improvisational, and so if you're looking for making plans for Nigel or or any other XTC song,
look in vain.
You're right. You're not going to find it there. It was something totally different. But nevertheless, the kind of music you were doing required a certain level of selflessness and collaboration too.
Yeah. I mean, it can be the greatest fun in the world, and I suppose because Andy isn't really the world's greatest collaborator, as I'm sure he himself would admit. That was kind of always going to be the limited nature of that collaboration. Really, we were in the pub one night in Swindon, and he said, I would like to do another record, but it would have to be completely improvised. Okay, why does it have to be completely improvised? Well, because it just does. Because all right. So he said, a good drummer. I said, yeah, I know, very good drummer. So that's how that started. But there was a feeling to it, and I did a lot of improvised music around that time. And something I don't know. Jazz people will obviously tell you different, but I thought the first thing that you do when you improvise is quite often inspired. And I think the first tune on Monstrance, what's it called? Oh Lovely Cosmonaut. I think that's fucking genius, that song.
Yeah.
And I never listen. I listen to that every now and again, appreciatively. I never listen to the rest of the record. I think the rest of the record's pushing its luck, really. It's like it's a double album of improv. Come on, it's noodles. And the best you can say about it is that every now and again there's a little bit, oh, that's nice, and then it fades away because that's sort of the nature of improv. But yeah, so the first Fine Careless Rapture, where you're all kind of, nobody's trying to do anything. We're all just kind of sniffing each other's asses. And, yeah, that's good. Yeah. And then the second time you do it, you go, oh, remember that bit? Yeah, that seemed to work, didn't it? And suddenly the spontaneity's gone. Suddenly everyone's kind of, trying to get back the thing that they had just now.
It's so funny to hear you talk about, how he insisted that it was an improvisational record because of, clearly, back in 1978, there was something uncomfortable about him accepting songs that he thought were actually pretty good.
Yeah, I don't know if he thought the songs were very good. I don't think they were all that good, really. But Andy wants to be the director of his own movie, and why the hell shouldn't he be?
Right.
I was too young and too full of piss and vinegar to go, it's his band, isn't it? I should kind of let him get on with it, do you think? or rather knuckle down and be a good keyboard player until at such time as I'm ready to go and do my own thing.
Yeah.
Rather than try to create some dozy half-assed rebellion within the ranks, which is just, reminds me of the Republican Party, actually. Sort of not helping anybody.
No, that's true. You talk about this new project, the dub project, Stick Basin. Did I get that right?
Yeah.
Is that something that you're looking to release next year, or is there Shriekback stuff that could potentially come up?
the two things are going in tandem, it seems. So I've got like maybe sort of half a dozen working tracks for the next Shriekback record, the 18th Shriekback original album. So I'm not quite sure how that's all going to pan out now. So I'm in the sort of there it is, sitting in the corner of the room very quietly, not saying much for itself, but okay, all right, you okay over there? I'll be attending to you later, I think. But you can't force these things. And in the meantime, I wanted to do some gigs, so I'm doing the stick basing. I don't know if you know, stick basing is kind of like I've been doing it for 15 years, I think, and there are three. There are 3 stick basing albums, which you can get from shriekback.com. So I think this next one probably will be the dub stick basing record. Yeah, that's what you asked me, wasn't it?
Yeah.
That's my reply.
Well, Barry, this has been great. It's been a real pleasure to talk to you. I've now talked to everybody who has been at XTC except for Terry, and I'm going to have to email him at some point, and that will complete the whole XTC sphere.
You should seek him out. He's easily the funniest.
I've heard that, and it won't go undone. That's for sure. I'll get him at some point. Good. But it's been a real pleasure to talk to you. Like I said, I've followed you for, it seems like forever, and I've really enjoyed your music over the years. So thank you.
I appreciate it, Mike. Good to talk to you.
Thank you, Barry. Take care. Apparently, you can get everything by Shriekback by going to shriekback.com. There's an awful lot of stuff to sift through, but I think you're going to love it. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed it. Feel free to follow the show and get regular updates on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. You can also email me at bax@rock102.com. I'd love to hear what you think. Thanks to Z&M Home Buyers for their support, and thanks to you for listening to Baxie's Musical Podcast.